morning, and good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to be here, and I want to start with thanks for Common Ground for this invitation to be here today, and I'm so glad to be here in this beautiful, beautiful city and this beautiful country with extremely cordiality from the Canadians, and I think that we'll start to learn a lot about humanities and humanization here in Canada, with the cordiality and the so kind people from here. So I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad also because we have the chance to hosted the first encounter when we will start to do this Congress in 3 languages, in English, Spanish and Portuguese. And this first event in these 3 languages, it was last year in São Paulo, Brazil, in my university, Federal University of São Paulo. And it was a great opportunity to share and to know what about we can discuss about this very, very important subject, health, wellness, society, and medical humanities. So I'm so glad to be here, because this is the continuing of a work that started last year in São Paulo. So the subject of my presentation today, it's about a question. And it's interesting because this question arose in the last encounter, in the end of the Congress in São Paulo, when we had evaluate meeting to see what happening in this event in São Paulo, and what we can do to improve this discussion. And one of the themes, one of the subjects more interesting in this conversation in the end of the last Congress was exactly a conceptual and philosophical question about humanities and humanize in medicine, in health, in general terms. So I would like to start my conversation with those today with a question: can humanities humanize medicine? So I would like to start putting this word in inverted commas, humanization in health, because I don't know if this concept, in fact I could see that it's not so used in the Anglo-Saxon context as we use in Latin American and Spanish and Portuguese context. But it's something very strong in our context to deal or to speak about humanization in health. And it's a very complicated and a very misunderstood concept. So we think that it's important to stress the philosophical and historical context of this concept. It's a very common and important concept in Brazilian and Latin American context. But what does humanization mean? Sometimes we think that humanization is only to be kind, to be good to the others. As Philip said, we have to see with the persons we are coordinate the sessions in this Congress. But in terms of health science, it's something more complicated than this. Talking about humanizations, it's not only to be educated, not only to be cordial with people. It's much more. So, what in fact means the humanization concept? So, we will start with a historical contextualization of this, and it's our problem today. We are living in the very transformative context of the technology and science. It's dominant today in our times. So the medicine and health sciences is very based on the technological and scientific approach. This is good in terms of what we get in terms of diagnosis and in terms of treatment. But we have some problems also with the human relationship in this context. Great benefits in terms of diagnosis and treatment can also mean great losses in terms of humanistic knowledge and human approach. This is something that in the beginning of the 20th century, it's already discussed, and it was a Canadian medical doctor, William Osler, which start with this discussion. What is the way that we are taking now? Because it's a problem when you think that medicine became more technological, more scientific, and less humane. So we have to take care of this. This is in the beginning of the new sense of the medicine in the early 20th century. So this is linking to the dehumanization of medicine and the necessity to rehumanize. It's a term that it's appeared in the last decades of 20th century medicine. In other words, how to humanize medical intervention and educate more humane doctors. So it's normal that you think that it's necessary to educate more specific, when in more specializations of medicine with a great technical and scientific training, but how to not lose the humane or the humanization approach. So this is the challenge that we start to see at the second part of the last century. So in Brazil, the humanization is a public policy called PNH, Política Nacional de Humanização, National Policy of Humanization. So the approach of this is to do the humanization as a public policy. And what's going on? So it's necessary to have a public policy to do the humanization in health. So let's start in 2003. So we have more than 10 years in this process. And what we had with the results? Well, we had an important changes in work process and ambience, but difficulties in human relationship and education. So we have important wins, in fact, in terms of to change the relationship between medical doctors or health professions and patients in terms of technical in terms of social relationship, but we still have problems with the terms of education, in terms of humanization in a more deep sense. So what's going on? Because the problem is the anthropological basis that we have when you're talking about humanization. Sometimes humanization programs provoke adverse, sometimes humanization programs provoke adverse effects. So in fact, I remember when I was invited, I'm come from history, I'm a historian. So, but I'm working in a medical school since 15 years. So I'm like a humanist in a different territory. So I was invited sometimes to talk and to discuss the programs of humanization in my university and in the hospital of my university. And I could felt that sometimes people, the medical doctors and the health professionals, has some kind of, of terror of the humanist and humanization problem, because they feel and they say that above all the skills and training that they have to do to have the technical and scientific knowledge and practical in this field, they have to learn how to be more humane. So the problem is sometimes this kind of adverse programs or effects. What do you mean? Sometimes, I remember a medical doctor who said to me that the humanization programs provoke strabism. Why? Because I have to look at my computer screen to see the protocol, and at the same time to look at inside the eyes of my patients. So I have to do this at the same time, so I get stressed with this. So, the problem with the programs of humanization is to think and to propose humanization as you propose a technical training. So, from this reality, we start with my group, with my staff. This is the starting point of a research project called The Pathologies of Modernity and Remedies of Humanities, Investigation and Experimentation. Today it's a big project supported by FAPESP. It is an institution who have grants to do this kind of research in Brazil. And we start to ask for two great questions. The first, what is the theoretical, philosophical framework of this kind of humanization programs? And the second aim of this project is to ask if it's possible to propose the humanization from the other basis or from the other experience than this come from the technical and scientific approach. So, we discovered that the problem with the programs of humanization is the technical approach. So the question is, could we teach humanization as we teach other knowledges and skills and health science? That's humanization is a technical or scientific problem. In the base, and the answer of this research is in the base of this belief, there is an anthropological mistake. product of the rational perfectibilism. This concept comes from the Australian philosopher called John Passmore, who wrote a book very, very interesting called The Perfectibilism of Man. And this kind of approach is a hegemonic conceptual humanism in modernity. So, in modernity, we invent the machines and we create a new word from this rationalism, from this perfectibilism. So we start to think that we move in the same movement. You know, we can think and we can deal with us. We deal with the machines that we created. So this is an anthropological problem, and more than anthropological problem. It's an anthropological mistake because we are not machines. Can we be programmed to be more human or humanizing? That's the question. Because if it is possible, the solution of the problems it's already yet. So, but we are not machines. We are not computers. We cannot be programmed. Yes, we can be programmed, but the result of this is not humanization, it's the humanization. So, it's necessary to think, to be aware, that we are not only Homo sapiens. We don't exist just because we think. We exist because we think, but also because we feel and we want. So, since Descartes and the meaning of the cogito ergo sum, think, then I exist, we start to think that the only way to be human is from the intellectual approach. That's why we have a so big development in terms of technological, in terms of intellectual life. But now we're starting to see, not now, it's all the time, but now it's something that we are very, very strong for us. That's what happened. It's the abandonment, of all these other dimensions of the human existence, as, for example, the feelings and the will. So, a different anthropological approach, it's necessary to think, to get another way to think about humanization, not only in health, but humanization at home. The human as a being endowed with affects, intelligence, and will. It is not new. It's come from Aristotle, but we forgot. We remains with the Cartesian meaning of the man, and we forgot the other dimensions of the human experience. So now, to think about humanization is necessary to rescue this kind of approach. This came, and this, its concept, it means a different approach of humanization. Now, based not only and not so in technical and scientific approach, but on aesthetic and reflective experience. This is very important because our preliminary experience is in fact in terms of affects. We are affective beings, and any kind of humanization proposal must to be take account of this. We need to start from aesthetic. The words come from the Greek, and it means awake, wake up. So it's opposite of anesthesis. This is very common in medicine. So it's the opposite of anesthesis. It's aesthetic, to wake up. And this wake comes from the feelings. And also from the feelings to the reflective experience. So in this project that I mentioned, we think that the humanization, it's not a result of a problem, of a technical approach, but an enlargement of the sphere of being. This concept comes from Montesquieu and is used by a Brazilian philosopher called Teixeira Coelho. It's important because the human experience, the humanization experience, must be understood as an enlargement of the sphere of being, not only in intellectual terms, but also in terms of affective and behavior. And the best way to initiate this process is the humanities. That's now that we start to talk about the role of humanities in this process. It's mean literature, arts, cinema, narratives, and more. Another medical doctor was preoccupied with this, the way that the medicine is in the 20th century, in this very technological and scientific way. Pay attention to the role of the humanities. He said in 1946, humanities is one of the major successes of medicine because only humanities can transform medical doctors into specialists in humanity. We forgot that the specialty in medicine, the specialty in health science is not only in the part of the humans, but the whole humanity. And the humanities, it's a good way to rescue this. For Teixeira Coelho and Janine Ribeiro, two Brazilian philosophers, humanities propitiated the experience of diffuse and indeterminate, something as important as the precise and determinate in the human existence, and even more. So, in our context, in university, in a training sense, we are focused in terms of determinate and precise. It means in quantitative ways. But in the human experience, it's important to take aware of the diffuse and indeterminate. This is part of life. And to understand well what is the humane and what is humanization, it's necessary to develop this kind of approach. The humanities provide us with a prismatic thought that permits an interpretation of the world and life beyond the quantitative and precisely measured. So this kind of approach come from the humanities could bring us this new view of the human experience that is beyond the terms of quantitative and precisely measured. And why? Because humanities are, first, a source of aesthetic experience that awakes our affects and feelings. It's obvious when you are reading a book, good book, or you are watching a film, the first reaction of this experience, it's an affect, come from the feelings of this experience. And this is very important in the humanities experience. Second, the humanities provoke a mobilizer of reflection. Why am I feeling like that? Why must things be like that? Not only to provoke feelings, not only to provoke affects, but also to provoke reflections about this kind of affects and feelings. So this is the process of the humanities. And this is a very important in terms of education and in terms of humanization. Not only to feel, but to think about what you feel. And the humanities is also a transformer of our view of the world and life, and our way of thinking and acting. So there is a very transformative experience in this. If you left this experience run out, you see, we do this experiment all the time when you are reading a book or when watching film, but not so time you go far, so far in this process, because we stop it in this process, and we have no this kind of approach in education to improve this kind of experience. So, who has never been touched or even transformed by a book, a film, or a narrative? It's a common experience. But how to deal with this kind of a human experience in an educational context? That's the question. That's the question for us. So that's the way to answer the question if the humanities can humanize health science or medicine or everything else. How to work with humanities as a way to humanize medical students, doctors, and health professionals as a whole. So I start to give some ideas. First, it is important to be aware of the meaning of humanities. It is not the same as human sciences. It's the first question, and in terms of concepts, it's not the same. The human science and social science, it's a kind of approach of study, of knowledge. And the humanities is knowledge too, but it's more than knowledge in terms of scientific or technological approach. So it's mean with all this aesthetical experience that I mentioned before. So we have to, be aware about this. Second, it's important to be aware of the aesthetical potential of the humanities. Affects and feelings should be taken account and worked with. And we have to be courageous to do this in educational context. I remember one time when I was discussing this with a colleague in King's College in London, when I explained my approach, my educational approach, he said to me, "Oh, this kind of approach is very risky." Yes, it's risky. But all this humanization proposal must be risky. You have to take it in account. And to be prepared to work with these feelings and affective experience in educational context. And third, it is important to develop an educational methodology that is starting from an aesthetic experience must promote a true reflective process. It's this kind of approach. It is not a kind of collective therapy. It's not only sentimentalism. It's necessary to develop a kind of methodology to work with this, not to take apart the feelings, introducing the work with feelings, with methodology, and to promote the reflective work. And fourth, it is important to find appropriate methods to evaluate the experience. This is very important because it's necessary to show what we are doing with scientific approach to. You know, when I talk about aesthetical and reflective experience, it's not something that is against the sciences. It's to be thinking inside, and it's as a whole experience. So it's very important that we are doing now with our project. It's to show what happened with persons who was participate in this kind of educational proposal. So, to understand what happened and what is happening with the persons and the methods that we use, it is reflective narratives, life oral history, participant observation, and etc. It's not only quantitative, it's more qualitative methods to show what is happening with this kind of educational approach. We have a very interesting experience with an activity that we run since 10 years ago, called the Laboratory of Humanities. What means an educational activity developed since how much? It's 5 minutes. Okay, I'm finished. Without my glasses. An international activity developed since 2003 in Palestra Medical School when I'm a professor, based on reading and discussing classical literature. I will present a more specific description about this kind of activity this afternoon in a parallel session. So, and this experience has been studied by several researchers, some are here, inside the major project pathologies of modernity and remedies of humanities. And we have some publications that I will show you at the end of this presentation. Since 2009, we start to do this kind of research to show what happened with this kind of educational approach aimed to humanization, based on aesthetical experience come from reading and discussing classic books. And the results have been very encouraging and promising. Yes, sometimes I am asking, but from the results in terms of quantitative, there is a challenge of this. But now I'm very interested to see and to understand what happened with people who are participating in it, like medical students, medical doctors, and what this kind of aesthetical and reflective experience come from the experience of reading and discussing classic books could transform these persons in professional and even in the personal lives. And it's very, very strong. So for me, this is the first path in this way to propose the humanization based on humanities. So we start with a question, and I have to finish with the answer, I think. So the question was, can humanities humanize medicine? And the answer is yes. But we need to know how to manage this. It's not something so easy, not something automatic. First, we need to know from which anthropological basis we are starting. That's why this interdisciplinary approach is so important for us who are interested to discuss humanization in health. Because any proposal has anthropological basis, and it's necessary to ask which are this anthropological basis where we are starting in our proposals. It's necessary to understand the meaning of the terms humanities and humanization. Because sometimes we using these terms without any sense, without any idea about the philosophical and historical framework of these terms. So this is very important, and this is a very important interdisciplinary work of the research groups that are interested in the subject of humanities and humanization in health. It is necessary also to be open to the aesthetic and reflective experience of humanities ourselves. It's not only a thing that you learn, that you start to do, but it's necessary to be affected by this. It means to live it, to be able to offer it. It means to propose some kind of humanization proposal. It's necessary to be open, to be humanized yourself. So I think this is the answer. I think this is possible and it's necessary to humanize medicine. And the humanities could be a good way, the best way, I think, to do this. But it's necessary to be aware of all this experience, of these questions, to do the right thing. I have some reference here, and I stress the first two articles was written in English, and one was about the Laboratory of Humanities, and it's about this experience, and was published in our review in Health and Society, and it's easy to access. And now we just published in the Brazilian review called Interface or Interface, but an English version also. I don't know if it's available now, but I think this in the next week maybe will be. It's a very close experience running in the undergraduate students, medicine, nurses, and biomedical students. So you can find more information about this discussion in these articles. This is my contact, my email, if you want any questions or if you want more information about this experience, about this project. And I will be here also in the guard session to ask questions or to share experience with you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.